Thank you very much for your attendance here. And we will continue to last speaker today. Not today, for the first part, sorry. I would like to invite Richard Pettifer, director, critic, and theater theorist, artist director of Faki Festival, based in Australia and in Germany. Welcome. I give you this one. Yeah.
Hello, yes. Can I put it in here or would this destroy everything? I don't. It's better for. Okay, okay. But can I put it into the stand? I need the support of the stand. Okay. Okay, cool. Hello, 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 hello. Testing. Orange, apple, banana. I don't know. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So.
Can I be with you?
Sorry.
Can I be with here
Yeah,
with you?
of course, please. A lot of support. Thank you. Yeah, great. Hello. Thank you, Milo. Dobry den. Ďakujem. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. First, I will briefly acknowledge brilliant and sincere colleagues in Mandrivny Vizhak Theatre Festival Lutsk, Gogol Fest in Mariupol, also decentralized, Kit Gavatovica Festival in Lviv, Teatrok in Odessa, Pro-English Theatre in Kiev, now all suddenly defending their communities in unexpected, cynical new reality. I acknowledge current wide-scale annihilation of Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian cultural infrastructure, theatres, communities, research institutes, and so on, and the perverse and forced militarization of Ukrainian culture and stages. It is a waste of time, energy, talent, and life, I propose, when an artist is forced to rehearse how to use the gun. Thank you also to Sasha, Danny, and Bogdan. Really nice proposals in these first three papers. It seems like it's a subcategory of censorship that we are in, so I will try my best to get myself censored here today. I guess we can try to storm the stage. We are not many, but if I say something too provocative, please be welcome. Also take the mic. We can create a real enaction of cancel culture here today with some very good scandal. No promises, but I can try. So I want to discuss. What do you mean? No, but you can take mine. I don't know. Yeah, you can silence me. I give you permission. You already now you silenced me. No, I'm joking. So I want to discuss today some of the inherent contradictions of what we are coming to think of as cancel culture in the context of what I will call a vanishing public sphere. My brief remarks, there's not a lot of time to develop anything. I apologize. We'll begin with a particular diagnosis and review the history, a little history of some of these relatively recent terms. So I'll give some examples, actually mostly from Australia, which is a surprise to me, maybe just for the comedy, before entering brief discussion about some appropriations of, especially of the emotionality, the emotional component of cancel culture, and some concluding remarks about the public sphere in general. So cancel culture begins for me largely with the article in 2015, The Coddling of the American Mind, discussing psychological oversensitivity in United States university campuses. The writers, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, writing for The Atlantic magazine, use the subject of microaggressions and trigger warnings to discuss what they see as an institutionalization of oversensitivity. They claim to be guided by a protective pedagogical concern, asking, what are the effects, I quote, what are the effects of this new protectiveness on the students themselves? Does it benefit the people it's supposed to help? What exactly are students learning when they spend 4 years or more in a community that polices unintentional slights, places warning labels on works of classic literature, and in many other ways conveys the sense that words can be forms of violence that require strict control by campus authorities who are expected to act as both protectors and prosecutors, end quote, long one. Central to the questions of the authors here are the concerns that also drive cancel culture, I claim. Not only that it might result in attacks on institutional figures, authors, celebrities, and so on, but that it might not even be culturally beneficial for the actual people who are advocating it. The institutionalization of oversensitivity can be extended into the institutionalization, similarly, of the psychological condition of the trauma victim, unable to confront monsters directly due to the intensivity of a potential re-traumatizing effect. We instead attempt to erase these triggers from culture in the first place. We can see already the authors here construction of an emotional sensitivity as a kind of pedagogical background. Students are not capable of conceiving complex or aggressive realities, or they simply prefer not to. This, I think, is not a new phenomenon at all. Yet the amplification of the position of the trauma victim has been accelerated by social media and a tendency towards first-person testimony, especially in the theater. And actually, I barely see any new writing today that doesn't have at least one moment of testimony, of direct address to audience, personal story, and so on. It's so common today in the theater that I see. This is, I claim, driven partly by a logic of marketing culture. And as any good social media worker will tell you, a good Facebook story needs always a human face attached. Likewise, we get a proliferation of causes on the internet designed to target our sympathies, to the extent that no global phenomena today come without an accompanying swathe of testimonials designed to address the viewer in a way that hits them on a personal level. The personal is political, that famous feminist second wave slogan of the 1970s has transformed into something subtly different and potentially much more sinister, I claim. Something like the political is personal, or as political subject, I cannot conceive of a politics unless it engages me on a personal level. Political interest of the individual, in this case, comes to rely and be dependent on the tools of identification as cultivated by marketing, and an abstract agreement that not only certain rights, but a lifestyle, an entire lifestyle, should be protected. Consider the famous photograph of the boy Aylan Kurdi washed up on the beach in Turkey. Identification here for the viewer, a particular type of viewer, I would say, is formed through the bright blue and red clothes of the, in this case, traumatically killed child, that communicate something like, this is how I would dress my child. This could be my child type of identification with, I'll call it, Western audience. This forms a relationship that is relatable to a particular idea. It fundamentally does not matter to the viewer that a child has died in a generalized way. What matters, in other words, is that our child should not die. The question of identification comes up consistently across conversations of cultural sensibility in and outside of the theatre. I will use here two Australian examples. In 2015, the then Prime Minister of Australia, leader of Australia, Tony Abbott, defended the closure of 150 government-funded community centres in Aboriginal communities in Australia, remote communities, so there's no infrastructure there. Now they close more. They close what is there in 2015. And the way he defended this was by saying that the government should not be funding people's lifestyle choices. Here, the history of Australia's racist and genocide colonial process, whereby people are dispossessed, left unsupported by structures continuing today, and offered solutions not compatible with their traditional cultures and practices in many occasions, is erased, cancelled in a different sense, in one swift gesture. They remain on the land because of lifestyle choices only, a decision that the middle classes of Australia would understand, a language that middle class of Australia would understand, as opposed to the complexities of cultural traditions and so on. Of course, the epic historical and sociological harm such a comment causes does not lead to Tony Abbott, the leader, being cancelled. He is protected by his successful evoking of an ideological tool. Unfortunately, as United States former President Donald Trump demonstrated, it is not so easy to cancel political leaders. You can't just say, "Not my president," and they go away. And indeed, an entire conservative figure can be constructed, and is often constructed, I claim, on a platform that amounts to little more than selective dismissing of these cultural sensitivities, targeting of them, a strategic attacks on marginal subject positions. As a general idea, call it punching down, can call it punching down. While the occasional victories of cancel culture are held up as examples of an extreme threat to the power structure, it should be remembered always that these victories, if you want to call them that, are extremely rare compared to the continuing invoking of tools of ideological oppression, which are effectively never ending. Meanwhile, however, a different picture of victimhood has also been quietly emerging. In 2021, the Australian celebrity chef Pete Evans, I don't promote him, experienced a media scandal when he posted a white supremacist image to Twitter. Evans was swiftly denounced on social media and saw several of his business deals collapse. Major brands fled from him suddenly, and so on. This fairly banal, for me, scenario was made more exciting by a video Evans posted to his Facebook account, which I hope to show you in a minute, in which he stands in front of a camera with a horse saying, "Well, just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any more bizarre, I've been accused of being a white supremacist." Stating that he didn't even know what a neo-Nazi was and had to look it up on the internet, Evans only pauses his cultural defense to giggle as a horse, which is beside him, licks his face. Non-human for you, Bogdan, intervention from the horse. We'll see it in a minute. The constructed performance of empathy with the horse is pretty weird, but a perfect example of how this kind of emotional empathy propaganda can function today within a new level of individual emotionality. There is no attack, in other words, that can't be rendered suddenly acceptable by putting a love heart on the end. Can we try to play this video, I wonder? It's a lot of fun. But first video of the conference, I won. Do I get a special prize? No.
Afternoon update, Ollie. Well, just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any more bizarre, the mainstream media have come out and labelled me a racist and a neo-Nazi. The fact that I had to actually Google what neo-Nazi meant is pretty telling. So I would just want to tell you this once and one time only. It is completely untrue, unfactual, and a load of garbage. I could actually say a few more words about it, but I won't. Anybody that knows me knows I stand for long-term, sustainable health for all humanity. I don't think there's anything else I need to say except peace. Love to you all.
Yeah, peace, Pete. Okay. Yeah, he said extremely telling, but telling of what? You don't know what a neo-Nazi is. You have to look it up on Google. Like, for me, this is like speaks more about the big problem in the Australian education system, but okay. Right, so the criticism of agents of cancel culture, repeated a little bit by Evans here, as well as consistently by members of the alt-right or other far-right groups, is that they are over-earnest and can't take a joke. But this seems like a willful misreading to me. Rather, actually, for me anyway, these emotional sensitivities are very fertile ground for a particular type of comedy. Anyone working in horizontality or consensus-based decision-making has encountered these types of moments before where everyone spends a lot of time trying to acknowledge each other's labor and acknowledge each other, and it becomes very difficult to actually get to the contents of a meeting, for example. And while that may not seem like paradise to some, there are, in my opinion, certain good times to be had in such a narrow frame, precisely because one encounters situations in which all attempts at acknowledgement cannot be satisfied simultaneously. It's an impossible demand in some sense. But as is consistently pointed out by those often accused of being agents for cancel culture, this seems not a reason enough to try. Even if it recreates some of the most absurd protocols imaginable, the journey may be more important than the destination. So a journey of acknowledgements may be more important than getting the right result. Indeed, many works that are cancelled will presumably later, in my view anyway, not really stand the test of time. Their problems are in fact not really that they were ever offensive to someone, but they were kind of shit quality in the end. Consider the boredom of listening to a misogynist joke from an event 10 years ago, such as from the comedian Louis C.K., which I commented on in a paper in a conference in 2015 at University of Canterbury. And this was prior to, I analyzed the dramaturgy of some of his comedy, and it was prior to this, I guess, scandal of certain women coming out and saying, oh, he showed his penis to us. So that was very interesting to me to, let's say, first analyze the attacks of his joke, and then find this in some way actualized in a scandal. I was right for once, I guess. However, has this changed for him? Because in a Netflix special, Sincerely, which I think is itself a kind of joke title, he addresses these scandals and says, I will quote him, "If you ever ask somebody, may I jerk off, masturbate in front of you, and they say yes, just say, are you sure? That's the first part. And then if they say yes again, just don't fucking do it. Just don't do it." That's his joke. One might well ask what has changed through this cancellation process, as, from the dramaturgy of this joke at least, the source of Louis C.K.'s power seems thoroughly intact to me. which he in fact playfully performs through this joke. These sources of power, as Louis C.K. points out here, continue even after the subject has been cancelled. The complaint from comedians and others seems to be then often not about the personal nature of the attack, but the removal of their ideological weaponry. This brings me to today's great comedian, Vladimir Putin, currently president of Russia, who helpfully, in preparation for the conference in March, offered a press release, a complaint that all of Russian culture was being cancelled. I don't know if you're familiar with this or you read about it. I will quote him. They are now engaging in a cancel culture, even removing Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, and Rachmaninoff from posters. Russian writers and books are now cancelled. And later in the same press conference, he compares the situation to J.K. Rowling's cancellation regarding her transphobic comments, attacks. Recently, quote, recently they cancelled the children's writer J.K. Rowling because she, the author of books that have sold hundreds of millions of copies worldwide, fell out of favor with fans of so-called gender freedoms. So have this completely absurd analogy being put up here by current president of Russia between Russia and J.K. Rowling. We can see here traces of the same complaint, but clearly in this case attached to a malevolent global para-fascist ideology of Putinism, which has champions, of course, in Europe, such as Erdogan in Turkey, and Duda, who draw power from Putinism in different ways, and mainly, especially in an attempt to attack difference or marginality. In this case, agents of cancel culture find their most significant obstacles that the same appeals to emotional protection used to justify a cancellation may be equally deployed against them. Isn't the Russian repeated claim during the invasion of Ukraine, continued invasion, you need to acknowledge the Russian narrative? I don't know if you've heard that one. You need to acknowledge the Russian sphere, acknowledge the Russian narrative. Isn't this, at least in language, a twisted perversion of a, let's say, Me Too claim to victimhood? Even the language of acknowledgement seems drawn from Rosenberg's study of nonviolent communication, not to mention the deep irony of a world leader decrying the erasure of their culture while simultaneously attempting the erasure of another. These, actually, can I time check quickly? I feel like I'm talking forever. Okay, little while. Appropriations of the language of non-violence points to a severe perversion in the public sphere, one that creates significant difficulties for the production of social change through heavy manipulations in the emotionality of performance. I don't really have time to go into it, but maybe in discussion. What is the public sphere if it is not, after all, a flexible set of negotiations conducted under preconceived conditions? If not cancellation, then we should ask how might this space effectively be renegotiated in an era of increased streamlining, efficiency gains, profit and exploitation in the global system of trade under capitalism. How does the public sphere continue to pretend itself as an equal place when its foundations are increasingly built on questionable ethical grounds? These questions were first presented by Jürgen Habermas in, and I quote him here, "In the context of this development, society was forced to relinquish even the flimsiest pretense of being a sphere in which the influence of power was suspended. The liberal model in truth, one of an economy based on petty commodity exchange, had envisioned only horizontal exchange relationships among individual commodity owners. Under conditions of free competition and independent prices, then, no one was expected to be able to gain so much power as to attain a position that gave him complete control over someone else. Contrary to these expectations, however, under conditions of imperfect competition and dependent prices, social power became concentrated in private hands. Cancel culture, then, might be categorized as a particular type of perverse democratization. The tools of persecution, previously confined to governments, and we've had few examples of censorship earlier today from Sasha, for example, are now in the hands of populations who can build ideological arguments themselves to decide whether an individual lives or dies in the public sense. If this sounds like an exaggeration, you can look at some of the stories from individuals unfairly targeted by this system. So they're often everyday people, not celebrities, who find themselves, for some reason, the target of a group or the target of attacks. I have friends who are good examples where they don't go out and seek necessarily to provoke, but this ends up happening, and then there's a big social media pile-on, it's called, where a group organizes against you and etc. Quite scary for individuals that do not necessarily invite public scrutiny. This, then, is merely an extension of the shifting of responsibility from government to individual agents. In other words, an extension of the neoliberal project, where the individual is coerced to accept responsibility, personal responsibility, that was previously the role of government, resulting in the ideological extreme of individual sovereignty. Government would no longer accept the responsibility of murdering Socrates. That duty instead has been outsourced to the consumer, who, we might cynically add, is helpfully guided in their thinking by algorithms developed by big tech, and who can build platforms for certain ironically labeled witch hunts, lynch mobs, or other terms for hunting people, which are now occasionally appropriated without irony by certain people who would like to present themselves as victims. Donald Trump was a good example, constantly talking about witch hunts and so on. This, I claim, is the true beginning of cancel culture, and why it doesn't begin with a figure like Socrates, but rather is a contemporary phenomenon. Today, a government would not act to silence public figure through persecution, often, rather marginalizing their annoying criticality through instrumentalizing individuals. Instead of a pause for critical thought, a stream without contemplation. So a necessary component, in other words, for cancel culture to function is a so-called democratization of media. Yet the problem remains, and here I come finally back to the stage, that these negotiations mostly occur in the purely symbolic space of representation, with their concrete effects as intervention, depending on their capacity to flow through from the sphere of representation into perhaps what Paul Gilroy refers to as convivial life in Against Race, which is a term for everyday interactions that define and dictate everyday exchanges in the material world. And it is here I claim that cancel culture, if we accept this term, encounters its biggest hurdles through an over-reliance on visibility, and at the same time, the stage may become a real place of reconnecting the space of symbolic representation into the convivial social space of the theatre. Does theatre still have the same power today to intersect with that social space? Can we hope to reconstruct the conviviality of good social relationships and being together, let's say, post-pandemic, in a context which has become so anti-human and fundamentally misanthropic? So I leave just with some very quick questions. What becomes, to return to audience, which is in the end the focus of my paper indirectly, what becomes of audiences in cultures with such heavy manipulations of public space? Are they wrapped in cotton wool, as Lukianov and Haidt claim students are in the United States? Are they weaponized into a passive mainstream by figures such as Pete Evans or Putin, who scoff at and dismiss any attempt to challenge powerful ideologies that comprise their own structures of power? Are audiences themselves still capable of being taught, as for example Brecht attempted, a truly interventionist or critical position, or are they doomed to simply gravitate towards power themselves? As Danny proposed, theatre can be protest or is protest, but can the audience still become protesters? Maybe finally, to those threatened by cancel culture, I think don't worry too much. Power is still easily defensible, and its challenges perhaps too comfortable to dismiss. And to quote one personal example from a director who was accused of misogyny in the rehearsal room, directly with a direct quote, he simply said, "I would never say that." And today that is still enough, sadly perhaps, of a defense. The act of lying is still pretty much the only defense that power needs, and that's a different type of problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your paper, for your words. The questions? If not, I start. Okay, there are two. Okay, thank you. Having to think about a sort of manipulation of the audience. It's now, because the theater as a synthetic, as I had mentioned in my work, art, addresses directly to the audience. There is a mass of information, attitudes, taking sides, obeying, whatever. Here we have, including, as I didn't mention, in that you never have space enough to, involving different medias in the theater. We watched yesterday in the performances. We're watching very often in the performances here. I mentioned enormous, big number of informations. Here, as I think, is a virus of manipulating the audience. It's not a question, just an initiation of speaking about the, I felt somehow in your work is beautiful, and in your explanation of the cases, a sort of manipulation. I think personally, and as a professional, that is the unfortunate step further in just taking off the ground of the audience to think critically. in the space of art. It, you know, mention not only theater, but all art as a space of expressing. And finally, the art is a tool of sending a message to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Sasho. I maybe would just say personally that I'm, maybe this doesn't surprise you, completely against manipulation in the theater. And I think that there is a strong argument today to develop theaters that are anti-manipulation, that actually resist these types of just say manipulations occurring in life, in everyday life for people, in the public sphere, if we can still call it that. But I don't see these types of theater being developed very much. I think there would be a strong argument for it today, but actually I see trends mostly in the other direction. Like I was referring to some of them, these testimony, for example, these personal stories designed to hit the heart. This is the trend that I see, which is for me one that very much follows on from, let's say, Instagram or some other cultural trends that are performing these types of manipulations. And actually the Pete Evans one is a really nice example. I find it very comic because what he does is just completely the opposite to all of the things that I work towards. It's like he gets the horse and then he creates some propaganda about it. It's like a crazy manipulation for me. Yeah.
Because we have to be aware that there's a big initiation of the factographic theater that I witnessed that in Slovenia. They had performances deeply engaged by the facts, for example, of climate change. The whole performance, you know, entitled as a fever, of the trafficking the immigrants from border to border. It's a beautiful performance that based on the factography. And also Frlic, I mentioned in Croatia, was by the authorities was accused that also, even in the democratic authorities, they're accused they're first primarily accused as a manipulator. That's why I asked you.
Yeah, thank you again. Presentation of facts is I don't know. Somehow I think we need to find an aesthetic today that can resolve this conflict of emotional manipulation versus its old one, but seems to be coming back in a new way today. And the work, of course, can be political without having presentation of facts, let's say, without having data, without being verbatim theater or a documentary style of theater, but it can be contained in the aesthetic. For me, a political theater does not exclude emotion at all. Anyway.
But is it possible on the stage, or must the stage come to the street? Because I'm thinking about it. For example, the Yes Men group. I don't know. I think you know them. They are a good example for me how to do this kind of the situation, which is in the reality, but yeah, it's a manipulation, but with the effect against the manipulations and all these things.
Yeah, I even wouldn't answer that directly. I think you might be right that the frame of the theater inside an architecture is not, an architecture like this one is not necessarily the right place. Taking it to the street, yeah, I mean, today I would say taking it into digital space is increasingly important, but how to do that without compromising criticality is for me a totally difficult challenge. When I also see other artists do it, I notice they also have difficulties with this. I add to your question, actually. What about digital space? Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Paviser.
I'm afraid I share with you some pessimism about the possibilities of controlling cancel culture and somehow having some way of preventing bad things happening to people, happening to institutions. And you talk also of democratization of media. I would like to know in what sense we can hope to somehow control the media without controlling them only politically. I mean, I'm controlling the way where they function. Do you think there is a way for a government, or a way and a responsibility to try and prevent this type of terrible incidents? And how what would you suggest? What kind of government would you suggest?
Yeah, it's a really nice question, and I'll give some quite absurd. I'll try to articulate some quite absurd everyday instances in both cases. Actually, about controlling cancel culture. Wait, you're sort of talking more about the control of these emotional defenses of emotionality. And I see this happening more and more in, like, let's say local media or some small instance where someone, I remember one in Australia that was like, it was a guy being convicted of big business crimes. And then he said, in his defense, that he was going through like an anxiety period and so on. And it was like, it is a defense, but it's like, it's the way that he said it. Also with Pete Evans, that's like, oh, this is why I did it, you know? This is why in his case, he fucked a lot of people. And it's like, you know, I felt really bad. And it's like quite absurd to read, you know? Like, the defense of emotion being deployed in this context. And I see it more and more in some, they're not spectacular examples. They're mostly very everyday, quite banal instances. But they worry me as an appropriation of what I see as a defense with some essential validity to it about care for marginalized people, creating protected spaces, safe spaces. These types of arguments, to me, they have validity inside them, but they can be used and appropriated in these types of ways. Second everyday example, you're talking about how to control the media is, yeah, it especially happened in the pandemic, but I got a really good, again, Russian-related example, sorry. But for me, as someone with a journalism background, it's quite frustrating to read a lot of journalism today. Now I sound like my father, but, and it has, like, for example, a lot of spelling mistakes and just poor quality journalism that I notice, especially in Australia. But the example that I will use is, was from a UK publication, and it was like, what is it? No, I can't. No, it was like about the sanctions, and the journalist wrote, or perhaps a sub-editor corrected it. Either way, it's a tragedy for me. The sanctions have kicked in, and the stock market is frozen, but the rubble has collapsed. It was like this. And you're like, the rubble has collapsed? What do you mean? And of course they mean the ruble, like the currency, but someone wrote rubble, which for me is like a crazy, in an otherwise very serious article talking about economics of Russia. This is a crazy error to make. I just give it as an example because I see these types of errors occurring really a lot in journalism today. And it's, for me, a question of going back to principles again. So some of the principles of journalism developed that have been practiced for a long time seem to have been abandoned. And these are good principles. Consent, protect your sources, these types of things, these seem actually not to really exist in journalism today. And I think this is a big problem. And then this absurd example I give about the rubble is part of it. That journalism doesn't have these checks and balances anymore to create something public. And indeed, that's not the objective anymore. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Maybe indirectly, not exactly.
But more about the political aspect, but I'm not sure what to expect from a democratic government. If it should try and regulate a little bit this social media and this cancel culture and this.
Yeah, well, maybe the principle of taking responsibility, which I sort of indicated inside the thing. There's a process in neoliberalism of outsourcing responsibility onto the individual, the sovereign individual, which I think is out of control and has come to an unhealthy level. So I'm openly in favor of more public intervention.
We have a message from Ivanka Apostolova. Richard, great presentation and discussion. Thank you very much. She's here with us. Yeah. If now we have just 5 minutes. That if someone want to have some ideas, would like to share with us, not just the people who are here physically, not just about the last paper, but about the whole things which we had on the program.
I had maybe a provocation for Bogdan, if he's still with us. I thought with the bird thing that I was like, yeah, but wouldn't it be a more radical proposal to imagine the bird is writing theater? Do you know what I mean by this? Like, to imagine instead of what kind of theater the bird would write if it could, to imagine that maybe the bird is already writing theater. In other words, to challenge our own idea of what theater is.
Yeah.
That question.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I don't know if we have the tools by which to understand if the bird is writing theater yet. We might have them in the future. I don't know. We might be able to in the future to, well, this sounds a bit like the picture I'm painting is a little bit, those, I don't want to offend anyone, but those Jehovah's Witnesses little brochures where people mix with lions, boa, serpents, and so forth in heaven, in this very idyllic kind of setting. So there might be a day when we reach that kind of stage, but in a different way, not in such a sort of romanticized way, but we might reach a moment where we actually we'll be able to understand points of view that are not only human, and that probably will help us to kind of solve a lot of crises, I suppose. Does that?
Yeah, kind of. I also work in this area a little bit, and my approach is always not to try to think for the bird, but let's say to use this imagine exercise to rethink myself instead. Yeah. So this is a shift in thinking about Anthropocene. Yeah, I just wanted to hit you with that, basically. But your answer is already good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is Jan Bogo's book about the speculation. It's more about the object, but he opens these questions. I think that very nice just to speculate about the non-human perspective is better than to try to go into them or trying to becoming. Yeah.
But isn't that the main preoccupation of theater? Becoming the other, becoming something or other, inserting oneself into a problem that belongs to another. Isn't that the kind of basis of theater or of acting in any case? Performing. It is about taking upon oneself a situation that, fictional as it is, or less fictional, but just taking it on and trying to become part of that situation and of that character, you know, that personality, I suppose, that point of view. That I think it is important to strive to become something else, because that's the basis, I think, of empathy, isn't it? Is the basis of connection and dialogue. I suppose maybe
Yeah. Actually, my provocation is along these lines. Wouldn't it be more effective to ask, is the bird already making theater? This seems to threaten the distinction between bird and human in a different way.
Yeah.
This is what I mean. It's asking the same question in a different angle somehow.
That's true, but there is a school of thought that would completely dismiss the possibility that a bird would make theater. So that would be unacceptable.
But that's the humanist tradition of theater that you
guys, maybe you can go to the lunch together and make discussion about it now. No, I'm sorry, but yeah, we need a break now. I think every one of us needed this 1 hour to refresh and then start with the second part. Thank you very much to Sasho, Dani, Bogdan, and also Ricard to be here with us in this part, and all your papers and tasks, and we'll see each other after the lunch.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I would like to thank you also, Milo, for chairing this first part and like basic info for online participants. Now we are going to end and we are back few minutes before 2 p.m. And so thank you for all your active participation and see you soon.